Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar where we will discuss how to safeguard your life sciences data with Druva and Amazon Web Services. My name is Aaron Friedman, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I'm pleased to be joined by Roger Huff from Allergan and Sarah Bodine from Druva. And before we begin, I wanted to let you know that we will have time for a Q&A at the end of the session. Please put your questions into the GoToWebinar questions window, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the session. And, please note that we may not get to all the questions, but if we are unable to answer your question today, we will be following up with you after the webinar. And with that said, there are several key themes that we hope you get out of the next hour. First and foremost, how you can protect clinical and intellectual property data during an acquisition. And we'll hear from Allergan and Druva on that specific use case. How you can secure electronic assets regardless of location for financial and legal purposes. And how Druva and AWS prevent data loss and simplify eDiscovery. And before we really dive into the story at hand today, I want to start by talking about the broad trends we are seeing in the life sciences industry. New capabilities are rapidly accelerating the generation of new data assets that are valuable to life sciences organizations, whether it's genomics, information, telemetry data from lab and manufacturing, or the broad swath of information generated from clinical trials, such as with device wearables or other types of quantitative measurements that pharma companies are using to advance their discovery. And if you sort of see the trend, senior executives across life sciences are pushing to leverage these data to generate new insight and really accelerate their product time to market because of the importance of first mover advantage. And when you couple this data tsunami with the development of targeted therapeutics at a global scale, a robust data management and security strategy really isn't anymore an option, but rather a necessity. And when we talk to life sciences and healthcare customers about their challenges, they mostly fall into the 6 buckets you can see on the screen. Securing and protecting one's data is job zero and really paramount when thinking in the context of intellectual property surrounding a multi-billion-dollar therapeutic. And while, security is an overarching theme, there are several other components organizations need to focus on in their data strategy. They include things like how do we acquire data from disparate sources, such as from a global clinical trials? How do we store that data in a way that is meaningful for downstream consumption? How do we process data in a way that's efficient? How do we analyze these data sets to generate new insights? And really, how can we distribute data in a manner that has, both fine-grained access control, audit logging, and is easily consumable by stakeholders, no matter where they may be? And, in reality, right, these challenges are not specific to a life sciences organization. When we talk to customers across industry, whether it's healthcare, financial services, media entertainment, oil and gas, et cetera, we hear these same themes time and again. And that's really what we think about when we talk about the data value chain. It's a set of common challenges and opportunities that our customers face with regards to their data strategy. And of course, every industry is unique, but we can always learn from, say, a use case in financial services and repurpose that to better serve our healthcare and life sciences customers. And when we pivot back to these industry trends, I mentioned a couple of slides back, several challenges emerge, right? So on-premises data management capabilities can't necessarily keep up with the data volume needed for meaningful analysis. And what this really impacts is organizational agility and IT agility. A lot of us are here today because, IT is core to the way businesses, whether it's in pharma or genomics or med device, payer provider, are really helping. IT is really serving as that way to transform the way an organization operates. And you need to have the ability to have agility in your IT organization so that the entire company can benefit. And, when we think about the challenges in regards to reimbursement of targeted therapeutics, capturing in-market real-world data requires new approaches. And being able to distribute the research and data sources globally can create data ingestion and security challenges. And all of this is really well addressed by AWS and our partner community, particularly due to the elasticity of the AWS cloud. And core to this is the AWS shared responsibility model for security. And when we look here, this sort of articulates it, where at AWS, we are responsible for the security of the cloud, things like our global infrastructure, our regions, all complete with multiple availability zones, so you get high availability for your applications out of the box, our edge location, our points of presence to bring the data and the experience closer to you, as well as our core services, right? The backend security of our compute, storage, database, networking, are well over 100 different AWS services. That security is our responsibility. And then we give our customers and our partners the ability to be secure in the cloud, things like client-side data encryption or server-side encryption, being able to monitor and encrypt your network traffic. And what we find is that, our partners such as Druva and others really extend our shared responsibility model for security by enabling additional controls, which are really important in regulated industries such as life sciences. And when you think of those controls, those could be things as enforcing encryption by default, or hardening operating systems, providing robust identity and access management capabilities, etc. And security is important, but along with security, especially in healthcare and life sciences, is compliance. And one of the things that we found that is very apologies for the slide jump, but what we found that is very important to our customers is that we have the accreditations and certifications to go along the lines with our world-class security. And some of these are especially meaningful to our healthcare and life sciences customers. Here are key lists of bodies that have certified us, or we have a workbook of guidance showing you how to validate an AWS environment against these standards. But this slide is certainly not even close to being all-inclusive. And many of our healthcare and life sciences customers adhere to different regulatory frameworks, such as HIPAA, HITRUST, GDPR, FedRAMP, or as the case in a lot of life sciences organizations, GXP. And today we're going to hear, I'm really excited to be joined by Allergan and Druva as we dive into Allergan's story around a merger and acquisition, and how data protection at day zero, which Druva provided, really helped secure an organization during the M&A activity. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Roger to talk about Allergan's story.
Good morning, everybody. Allergan is, as you can see, is headquartered in Dublin, Ireland, publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange's AGN. We have manufacturing facilities around the world. We have global R&D centers, marketing, sales facilities around the world. The current Allergan came out of a merger between Actavis and Allergan, and back in 2015, and as a result, Allergan is, as you can see, is a multinational pharmaceutical company. We focus on development, manufacturing, commercialization of branded pharmaceuticals, devices, biologics, et cetera, and the whole idea is to serve patients around the world. Get that slide to advance. Myself, my name's Roger Huff. I've been with Allegan for over 10 years. I'm currently Associate Director of Security and Investigations and Forensics. I have a history in information security, incident response, spent time in the IT operations space, remote site management, implementing technologies, and things like that. I also have a background in law enforcement, which serves me very well in my current assignment. As I mentioned before, Allergan has a history of acquisitions. We've done 20 plus in the last couple of years that I can think of. It's been very busy, and that really does tie into how Druva came to us, or we partnered with Druva and seen that benefit. So one thing about data challenges during an acquisition, first is every M&A is unique. Of course, until you've done a few, then they all seem to be so similar. We have several challenges before us. Usually there are systemic challenges, geographic challenges, and these both play a part in the ultimate goal of bringing this new additional data into the Allergan environment as efficiently and accurately as possible. Now, in my experiences, those challenges, they can manifest themselves in different ways with a variety of ways to address them. But there's one additional challenge that falls into an even more unique category. And that category, that being potentially intentionally disruptive, and that is the human challenge. When it comes to mergers and acquisitions and how people are impacted, things can get a bit dicey, and oftentimes the necessity to ensure that our corporate data is not lost, whether intentionally or accidentally. During that transition, before, during, after that transition, it requires that we preserve the data in advance, and it frequently requires that activity to begin on the day of or in advance of any announcement. Many organizations have liberal policies when it comes to how employees can use the assets that are loaned to them by their employer. And oftentimes the line between personal and professional becomes blurry. Sometimes what belongs to the company can inadvertently get deleted or modified. So regardless of the intent or causation, the availability and integrity of corporate data is critical, and it absolutely must be preserved. So let me give you a kind of a high level, and for my forensics folks out there, this is some of this is going to be pretty obvious, but typically to resurrect lost data, we have several industry standard avenues for effecting such a recovery. Some of them are very simple, and some of them are very complex, and each have their own risks and of course associated costs. Most important to note, and again, this is from experience, none of those avenues are fail-safe. There's no guarantee that created data that has been intentionally or unintentionally destroyed can be restored. Sometimes it's been simply deleted and can be recovered from the deleted items folder. That's what I call inadvertent data loss. We can easily recover that. Other times, a bit more effort, let's say, has gone into the deletion or losing process, and therefore more effort is required for the restoration or recovery. Now, my last option is when there's been more malicious intent frequently. Data deletion and extensive efforts to cover the activity require the highest level of effort to effect recovery. The cost of this expertise can be very high, and we're often stuck between a rock and a hard place. We need the data. It's been deleted or destroyed, and we absolutely need to have it. So don't Snopes this story on me, because it's really just to illustrate a point. But there's a homily that I think amply demonstrates the difference between the value of an action and the knowledge behind that action, and it applies to that third bullet point of expertise. It goes something like this. Nikola Tesla visited the Henry Ford factory, and they were having some difficulty there. Ford asked Tesla if he could help identify that problem area, and Tesla walked up to a wall of a boilerplate, made a small X in chalk on one of the plates, and left. Ford was thrilled and told him to send me an invoice for the bill. The bill shows up for $10,000. Ford wanted a breakdown. Tesla sent another invoice indicating a $1 charge for marking the wall and $9,999 for knowing where to put it. So the relevancy is that in this case, we know that the data is missing. We have a reasonable idea as to where it likely used to be, and we employ third parties with the required expertise to attempt recovery of that data. Obviously, the takeaway there is that the expertise is very expensive. It's also very difficult. In addition to the obvious, it's and like I said, it's not a perfect science. It's not foolproof. And on top of being expensive, tedious, time-consuming, and very challenging, it doesn't always work. So that led us to what I call the new normal. And in contrast to those earlier processes, we imagine a scenario that ensures that all critical user-created data, where it could be preserved to an online source without impacting the user or the custodian of the data. What if we could protect it in advance, mitigating the risk of intentional or unintentional data loss? In other words, if we could somehow virtually be there from the very beginning, ensuring that corporate data assets and information would be protected, that would be ideal. That would be absolutely ideal. Go back to the quote unquote old days. Merger, sweep in, grab everyone's computers, cart them off. That's not realistic in this day and age, nor is it required. So with Druva, we're able to essentially do the same thing. In the new normal, we'll partner with our new colleagues to install the InSync client on the target endpoints, generally laptops and desktop computers. And from that moment, start preserving data to the cloud. We control what data is being backed up. We can target it via different profiles and things like that. But essentially, we're ensure that the data preservation is underway from the very beginning. Now, to minimize impact on the user, we can do an automatic installation. We've done using SCCM, other scripted tools. Those are all options and available. We can also do a manually or scripted installation. At the end of the day, though, we're able to preserve these valuable corporate assets from the very beginning, from the outset, and therefore improving our ability to recover lost data should the need arise. So some of the benefits of Druva is obviously the simplified data protection and preservation of user-created data. It's automatic, virtually immediate, and requires minimal human interaction. And from the user standpoint, there's really no impact to the user. They essentially are protected from data loss. It doesn't impact their work. It doesn't slow their computer down. We've done a variety of different tests in deployment. And the beauty of it is, like I said, it is automatic, immediate, and requires very little interaction. So with that, I'd like to introduce Sarah Bodine from Druva.
Thanks, Roger. Excuse me. Hello, everyone. What I want to do is, kind of talk through the pieces of Druva's solution that allows, the sort of scenario that Roger was talking about. Hold on here. I am also having a little bit of slide issues, so let me get to where I need to be. All right, so Druva provides a platform that allows organizations to manage all of their data in the cloud. And this is data that could be across endpoints like laptops and mobile devices, which is really what Roger is talking about, as well as across your physical and virtual servers and your workloads of data that's natively in AWS, right? So Druva allows organizations to go and manage all of that data in the cloud, so completely as a service, no hardware needs, no infrastructure on premises that you need at all, and then giving IT the tools to be able to go in and not just manage that data from a protection standpoint, backup recovery, disaster recovery, things of that sort, but also then for some of these more governance-related needs in terms of being able to make sure that data is managed appropriately and that you have data as required during an acquisition or a legal situation or an HR situation or whatever that might be. So if we talk about it from an end user perspective, When we're talking about end user data, we're really talking about data that's on endpoints, so those laptops or mobile devices, as well as cloud applications like Box, Office 365, Salesforce, and G Suite. And taking all of this, distributed end user data, centralizing it in the cloud, and then making it back available to IT. So our mechanism to gather all of that data is the backup functionality that allows you to do that. And then in terms of not just the recovery options, but now you have the ability to do, archival, long-term retention with hot, warm, and cold storage. You have the ability to search across that entire data set. You have the ability to provide audit reporting so you know what's happened to that data from both a user standpoint as well as an administrator standpoint, as well as tools to allow you to proactively monitor that data for any compliance issues, such as social security numbers showing up on someone's laptop where they shouldn't be, and then the ability to go in and preserve that data on hold for whatever your needs might be, right? So if we start to talk about this specifically from a M&A perspective, really we're looking at Druva providing 4 different buckets of resources that are available. And so the first part of that is that day zero data collection. And so we talk about it as collection when we're talking about M&A, but this is also that backup process that's going up and collecting whatever the data on the device or in those SaaS applications is that IT specifies that they need. So it could be all of the data, or it could only be data that's in certain locations based on what you need to configure. This can be done silently, so that as Roger mentioned, you don't have users that have the ability to go in and maybe do something malicious in terms of what's happening before they even know that Druva's there. The data is already being backed up and collected and secured in the cloud. The end user doesn't have to have any role in this process at all. And then there's the data preservation piece of this, which allows IT or the legal team to go in and place legal holds in place. So that data, once it's collected in the cloud, now we can go ahead and place a hold on that data and make sure it's immutable, make sure that, even if a user goes and does something malicious on their laptop after the fact to delete data, that data is already preserved in the cloud, and whatever the user's doing is not going to have an impact on your ability to actually provide that data as required for legal reasons or whatever else. And also the ability to go ahead and then export that data directly into your eDiscovery service. So we'll talk about this in just a moment, but again, the ability it's held in place in the cloud. You're not having to set up a separate storage just to hold on to this data. Your backup data is also now serving as your collected data, and then you can easily export just the data set out that you need into whatever your tools are that you're going to use as part of the eDiscovery process. And then also to help you make sure that the data you're collecting and preserving and exporting is relevant, you have the ability to search across that data to make sure you're finding what it is that you actually need, and also have some pre-culling tools to make sure that you're not sending a much larger data set than required, right? So you can start to refine down this data set, by date or whatever it might be. So you're only passing over to the eDiscovery provider exactly what it is that the data set that's relevant. And then here at Druva, we also have a professional services team that is available to work with companies that are going through these acquisitions to help them make sure that the process from start to finish in terms of collecting that data is as automated as possible and is as straightforward as possible for the customer. So we do offer those services as well. But if we keep talking about from a technology standpoint, let's talk a little bit more about that data collection piece, right, in terms of what we mean by this. And this is that backup, recovery, and archival piece. So again, this is the ability to collect the data that's on your endpoints or in your SaaS applications. And when we talk about endpoints, we could be talking about Android or iOS on the mobile device side, or Windows, OS X, and Linux on the endpoint side. And IT has the ability to go in and granularly configure the entire process, right, in terms of, how much storage is given, how the retention works, how long data is saved, what Amazon regions we're utilizing for this on the back end. All pieces of this experience, IT can go in and configure as they need to, right? So this is very granular from an IT perspective. And then the process itself is very non-intrusive. So Druva got its roots really in mobile device backup. So we've created a solution that is very lightweight in terms of what we actually send across the network. So the data is deduplicated on the client side across your entire organization. So if an attachment goes out to 500 people in your organization, that attachment is only backed up once, right? So we're reducing the amount of data that actually has to be sent across the network as much as possible. And the experience there is that it means that for your end users, they're not going to experience any sort of, bandwidth implications or anything of that sort when the backup is happening. So the majority of the time, users won't even have any idea that something's happening on the system. We also, in addition to capturing all of the data that's important, we also have the ability to capture personal settings, so things like printer settings and desktop settings and, browser bookmarks and things of that sort, so that if something does happen to the device and it has to be entirely restored, you can restore the entire user's experience, not just their data. The restore process can be initiated by either IT or the end user. The idea on the end user side is that everything's a very simple sort of wizard-based process that they walk through, making it as easy as possible for users to self-serve themselves, as opposed to having to rely on IT for a lot of that common functionality that they might need. And then you also have the ability to preserve users, so that if you have users that are exiting the organization, you can still make sure that their data is preserved in the cloud as well. You're not at risk of losing that. And then in terms of deployment, we mentioned the ability to silently deploy it. We do integrated mass deployment agents with a variety of options that are out there to make it as simple as possible for whatever your organization's needs might be. And this could be, easy to deploy to 500 users, or it could be 50,000 users, depending on the size of your organization. So we do work with enterprises of all sizes. And then if we move forward here to the data preservation side, just a few pieces of this that a lot of times in organizations, when you have to go out and collect this data, you're having to put it in a secondary storage location, right? And our mechanism is let's back the data up, we store it in the cloud, and then when you need to actually preserve that data for some sort of litigation purpose or whatever it might be, that data is just held in place. You're not moving it somewhere else for that initial preservation place. We also have a completely separate role that's set up for the legal administrator team. So you might have a situation where, IT has their concerns around backup recovery and making sure the data is protected, but the legal team has completely different reasons that they need to interact with that data as well. And they might not need access to all of that additional IT functionality. So we have a specific dashboard for the legal admin where they're able to go in and place legal holds and export data as they need to the eDiscovery vendor. But they're not also seeing all of that IT functionality. And it also means that IT can get out of the business of having to manage those legal holds and all of those sorts of things. In addition to capturing the data itself, we also capture an extended set of metadata, so that if you're in a situation where you need to prove the data integrity, prove that the data that you have is actually the data that was originally created, you're able to go in and do that and prove if any tampering has happened or anything of that sort in a legal situation. We also capture the file signatures. We do provide chain of custody reporting, and as I mentioned earlier, the auditing part as well in terms of reports of being able to say, did users tamper with things or did the administrators tamper with things? You have all the reporting there to be able to show sort of exactly what's happened with that data. And then the data ingestion, we do this a couple of different ways. We do have secure WebDAV access where you can go ahead and just use a URL to access all of your data that's on hold for a particular matter. And then we also have a direct scenario with Xterra, which I'll talk about in just a second. And then finally, in terms of data relevancy, those search and culling tools, the idea behind this is that you should be able to go in and do investigative search across this data. This is part of that forensics piece, and make sure you're able to find exactly the data that you need for a particular time. And this isn't just across the devices themselves. This is across all of the user data. So if I'm doing a search, I'm searching not just someone's endpoints, I'm also able to search Office 365 or Box or whatever else you might be using in the organization that you've deployed and synced to. It's also searching across all of those storage locations, right? So I'm searching all of my regions that are out there. I can look for data across my entire data footprint, as opposed to really trying to do it one device at a time. And then the pre-ingestion culling tools allow you, again, to minimize how much data you're collecting, making sure you're collecting what it is that you need, but that you're not passing an exorbitant amount of data that you don't need off to your law firm or to your eDiscovery vendor or anything of that sort, because the more data you're passing over, the more costs you're going to incur later down in the process. You also have the ability to not just pass off data that's, active that day, but if files have been deleted off of laptops, you still have that preserved in the cloud, and you have the ability to go and pass off deleted files as well. So a variety of tools to really make sure that you're able to go in and collect the data set that you need, and then make sure that the data integrity is preserved, and that you can go ahead and provide all of the reporting around that to prove that the data is correct and accurate. And then finally, to make things a little bit easier, especially for clients like Allergan that leverage, eDiscovery vendors like Xero, we also provide legal hold APIs, which allow eDiscovery vendors to connect directly into our system. So in this case with Xero, they're able to leverage our legal hold APIs. So the legal team is able to go directly into Xero, place their legal hold, pull data back out as they need to in terms of exporting that data set, and go in and do their analysis right within that. So they're able to they're working across two different platforms, but they're only having to actually interact with one platform, that eDiscovery provider, to do their work, and then the API calls allow it to pull the relevant information that's on hold within Druva. So really trying to take a process that can be very, very complicated and time-consuming and expensive, and streamlining it as much as possible for the legal team. So it's very straightforward for them to go and make sure data is preserved first off, make sure they can find the data that they actually need and that data is held, and then once it's held, working through their eDiscovery solution to pull that data in and then go on into the next step of the process. And then from an architecture standpoint, I just want to touch on this and kind of talk about how we work with AWS, right? So Druva utilizes AWS regions across the globe, and essentially what we give to our customers is the ability to go in and mix and match the regions that you need based on where your organization is, where your employees are, based on privacy regulations, whatever that situation might be. So, we work with a large number of enterprises that are global. So they might have an office in Germany, and thus they need to leverage AWS's, Frankfurt region, or they might have an office in Brazil and they need to make sure that data is staying there, right? So we allow our customers to go in and configure the storage regions that they need accordingly. And essentially what this means on a back-end perspective is that at the point the user goes ahead, or the customer goes ahead and authenticates against us, we send a request to our Cloud Master, which is an EC2, and the Cloud Master is able to determine what region actually where that data is held. So you can have, like I said, you mix and match across the regions, and then within each region, we're utilizing EC2 to actually do all the front-end compute, but then the data itself is stored in S3 buckets, but the metadata is stored all in DynamoDB. So as we're sending data across, we're separating the data and the metadata. We're only sending distinct blocks, so we only back up changes. No block is ever backed up twice across the organization. Metadata is separated out, and then whenever data needs to be restored, we're querying DynamoDB on the fly to be able to then look at those indexes and reconstruct the exact data that you need at any particular time. Everything is encrypted as it's moving, and then everything's encrypted as well once it's within the storage buckets as well within S3. And the other piece I'll just add, even though we're talking a lot about endpoints today, from a SaaS perspective, for the Office 365, G Suite Box, and Salesforce, that's happening cloud to cloud, obviously. So instead of having to traverse your network like it would be with a laptop that's sitting in an office building, we're just using APIs to connect directly from our AWS Cloud Master and the SaaS application itself. So we can do direct API calls. So as you're backing up that data, as you're working with that data, it's never traversing your network. It's just going between our AWS instance and the SaaS provider. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Aaron.
Thank you, Sarah and Roger. Really, really valuable discussion there. I think this is, really important in driving home before we begin the Q&A. The value of data backup, regardless if it's an M&A or other to life sciences organizations. When we start to think about regulations and quality management systems, et cetera, having that really robust track and trace capability, we find is really fundamental to a lot of the life sciences customers, particularly, pharma and med device that we're talking to. We do have several questions, and I want to encourage everyone, of course, please feel free to enter additional questions into the questions box, and we will do our best to answer for the remainder of time. The first, question, sort of is for Sarah. I know you talked a little bit around the aspect of, installing Druva on a bunch of different endpoints. Can you expand a little bit on the overall process for installing Druva on a fleet of devices? So if you have, how do you do it at scale quickly, effectively?
So, especially if you're doing it at scale, we work very closely with our professional services team to make sure that there's a clear path in terms of how we're going to go ahead and do this. Generally, and first off, I'll just say, we leverage Active Directory, we leverage tools like Jamf, we leverage, SCCM. So there's the standard tools that you can leverage to help in the deployment process, whether you're automating it or doing it more manually. But generally what we do with an organization, especially when we're doing it at scale, is we'll have the conversation in terms of, okay, what users should we be backing up first, right? So we're not going to perhaps turn on 40,000 users all at once. We might choose a smaller data set because we know that because we globally dedupe on the client side, right, those first backups we have to capture initially all of the data that's on those devices, right? But every subsequent backup that or every subsequent user that we're adding, we're conceivably capturing less data because we've already captured the data from those first users, right? So we go through, we pick the users that we want to start with that are generally a particular group in the organization or, a particular role in the organization. We start with them, and then we tier it out from there to the rest of the organization. So what you find is when companies start coming online, those first initial backups take a little bit longer because we're capturing all of the data, and then every user they add after that fact, we're capturing less and less new changed data from their devices, and each one of those users is coming online faster and faster. So depending on the size of the organization, like I said, we work with our professional services team, and they can help to kind of build out the program for each individual client. The smaller clients tend to go ahead and utilize Active Directory and some of those other tools to be able to do it themselves relatively easily.
Thank you for that. So obviously a lot of the conversation today, relating to another question, has focused on end user data, right? Data from endpoints or Box or G Suite or Office 365 or Salesforce. Does Druva only protect end user data, or are there other sort of key capabilities that you find are very meaningful to life sciences organizations?
So we're talking a lot today about end user data. So that's the, endpoint and Office 365 and G Suite, and as you just mentioned, the different SaaS applications, right? And our approach there is that it gets very difficult for these organizations, especially life sciences that have a lot of research data, that have a lot of very sensitive data, to have to manage all of these different types of data in different locations, right? To have to go to Office 365 and manage it, and then to have to go to whatever your endpoint tool is to manage it. So the first answer is, we manage all of that end user data, but we manage it by having a user-based approach where we collect all of it and then store it in the cloud, and then IT just has to go in and work with it in that one location instead of all the different disparate data sources. We do, however, though, at Druva also provide similar support on the server side of the house across physical and virtual servers. So, you can, similar concept in terms of across your entire data footprint on the server side, regardless of how many locations you have, regardless of the geographies involved, a single point to go in and interact with all of that data. And then we also provide backup recovery and lifecycle management to AWS native workload data. So this is data that could be natively in EC2 or RDS or Redshift or in some of those places as well. So we really, across our platform, support most of the enterprise data sources that organizations would have through this single pane of glass approach. Were there other questions, Aaron?
I realized I had muted myself. My sincere apologies. But yes, there were. And related to that is if we wanted to protect both laptops and, say, the SaaS endpoint data like Office 365 or Box, do you have to have separate instances of InSync, or how exactly does that work together in terms of whether it's licensing or sign up for, how do organizations get started with their disparate data sources where some are endpoints, some are SaaS?
I'm sorry, Aaron, could you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. So basically, right, so if organizations, I think this is the gist of the question. If organizations want to protect, say, both endpoint data as well as SaaS data, such as on Office 365 or Salesforce, do they have to have separate instances of InSync? How does that work from the overall process and licensing standpoint?
Yep, I'm sorry. Now I got the question. All right. So no, it's all one instance of InSync, right? So from an IT perspective, they have one dashboard that they go to where they're managing all of the data across all of the different data sources that you just mentioned. We do licensing on a per user basis. If we're talking about endpoints, we do licensing on a per user basis where each user can have up to 10 devices, right? So on average, we know that users have somewhere between 2 and 3 devices. So per user up to 10 devices on the endpoint side. And then on the SaaS application side, there's a variety of different bundles that are available, but it's per user again. So we really look at it from a user perspective. If you've got 100 users that are using Office 365, then it would be 100 licenses. But it's all one instance from an IT perspective. They only have to go to that one instance to manage it across their entire footprint.
Great, thanks. And then this one's for Roger. So Roger, I know we were talking today a lot about M&A activity and how to protect against that. Do you find sort of additional use cases behind M&A or besides M&A activity that you personally have worked on where these type of backup and data provenance capabilities are very important to a large organization like Allergan?
Yeah, I have found tremendous use for Druva. The M&A is one of them. We actually don't fully leverage all the capabilities of Druva at Allergan. There's a mantra that I have with respect to Druva and art and implementation, and that is that it's for me, not for them. And that's somewhat unfortunate because there is a huge benefit to what Druva does to the end user as well, and to the help desk and those different areas. There's benefit there that we don't leverage. But I have taken that possible experience and leveraged it for other areas. Quick example: I have an executive who migrated his computer to another computer. He got a refreshed computer. Something went amiss during the transition of his data from his old computer to his new computer, and I was able to assist by going into the Druva console, locating the file or folder that was in question, and restored that for him. That is within the Druva feature set, but it's not something that me as an investigator or forensics person really gets into. So I have used it for things like that. The M&A piece is just one of the areas that it's been very effective for us. I could go on for literally hours about different ways that we use Druva. Just imagine any sort of scenario in which you have critical data. I heard it mentioned earlier about the deduplication thing. It's a huge point. I have in excess of, what do I have? 67% deduplication savings. My data right now, transferring data in the graph that you see on my console, the graph of data that's being transferred is tiny. Total data is huge because it's deduping. So to that, what I started to say is, imagine a scenario in which you have or need access to your data. If you could get the data in a single location and leverage it from there, very helpful. Under the data governance piece, data governance, think about a virus or some sort of rogue email, or not rogue, a document that's out in the wild, and somehow you don't want it there. And you can go through your data governance piece and see all of the data that's in your environment. Say, who's got that spreadsheet? I can go say it. Druva, who's got that spreadsheet? And it'll show me everybody that's got it. And that could be, again, just the imagination. The imagination can go crazy. There's a lot of value in being able to see your data, like Sarah had said, in a single pane of glass, being able to see everything that's yours in one place. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think it did quite comprehensively, and thank you for expanding on that use case. I think that's something that's really powerful, right? To understand who, not just the backup and recovery, but who in your organization has that data at a specific piece of time, and especially right with M&A and other type of activity, that's a really good sort of tracking and monitoring tool, and then you could and alerting in the end, because that's of course what's in the end I'd say very important in terms of security compliance.
Right, and let me just add in another little interesting piece, not to go too far, don't want to open too many cans of worms, but there's also this excessive data usage feature that is interesting for discussion, right? It's one of those reports that will pop up and it will tell me when I have a user that has unusual data activity, and that is generally my investigation people and incident response people usually like this piece. It'll tell you that user Joe has downloaded an exorbitant amount of files out of nowhere. He's downloaded 500 files to his laptop computer. That can be very interesting. What sort of data leakage is taking place? Is that normal? It can be worth a conversation with the user to be proactive. Again, seeing your data, where it is, in transit, at rest, those are all incredibly valuable.
Alrighty. So I think that is all the time we have for today. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining and really learning about both Druva itself, but the core capabilities it can bring to life sciences organizations. I recognize that we didn't get through all the questions today. We will, as I mentioned at the beginning, be having someone follow up with you after personally to make sure that your questions are answered. I want to, again, thank everyone for attending and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and evening, no matter where you might be. And we will be sending out, copies of the slides, the webinars, as well as answering the questions in the upcoming days. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And that's about it. Thank you so much.